Hello, welcome to your next GCSE history lesson. Mr. Durbin here. We are looking today at the final unit in the Viking expansion course, which is looking at Viking kings. In our first lesson, we're going to look at the first Viking king on our specification, Harald Bluetooth. But before we get stuck into Harald and the kings of Denmark, let's do some recap so we can get ready for your low stakes quiz. There's 5 questions. Pause the video now, answer the questions, and come back when you're done. Okay, welcome back. I'm going to put up the answers now. Pause if you need more time to check the answers. Okay, if you need more time to check the answers, you can pause the video. Let's carry on with today's lesson. So we've learned now 4 of the 5 sections of the Viking expansion course. And we're down here right at the bottom, the Viking kings. This is the final bit of our course. And the good thing about this is that everything we've learned so far about the Vikings is going to get pulled together when we study the Viking kings. You can use the last page in your knowledge organizer, page 5, to help you if you get stuck on any parts of this course. So let's think about how the story so far. We saw when we first looked at the Viking homelands, we saw that the people who ruled the Viking homelands were the Jarls. We talked about kings a little bit, but there weren't really kings in the Viking homelands in the 9th century, at the very start of the Viking Age. However, over time, some of these Jarls got more powerful, and we started to have, by the end of the 9th century, like fewer, more powerful Jarls. And some of these Jarls will have called themselves kings, but they weren't really kings in the way that we understand kings in other parts of history. They might have used that word just to show how powerful they were, but they were really just warlords who were very powerful. However, by the middle of the 10th century, um, there were in some parts of the homeland, some parts of Scandinavia, kings emerging from these jarls. And the first place where this really started to happen was in the homeland of Denmark. And at the start of the 10th century, Denmark got its first king. The first proper Viking king was this guy called Gorm the Old. Now, as you can probably tell by the fact that he's called the Old, he reigned for a very long time. He lived to a great age. I think he must have got called Gorm the Old later in his life, otherwise that'd be a bit strange. Anyway, Gorm the Old does not need to concern us very much because things really start happening in terms of Viking kings with Gorm's son. And we're going to look at the 3 kings who come after Gorm the Old because their stories show us how the Vikings are changing as we get into the later 10th and 11th century. So Gorm had a son called Harald Bluetooth. We're going to look at him today. And he ruled Denmark from 958 to 986. We're also going to look in our next couple of lessons at Harald's son, Svein Forkbeard, who ruled from 986 to 1014. And then the king who came after him, Canute the Great, a king whose name you need to be very careful to spell correctly. He ruled from 1014 to 1035. We're going to see how these 3 kings built on each other's achievements and really changed what we understand the Vikings to be. And as you can see, this is kind of happening after the period of raiding and settlement that we've looked at so far. So, today's lesson, Harald Bluetooth. Here's the title for today's lesson. How did Harald Bluetooth change Denmark? Pause the video, write down that title, and come back when you're done. Okay, welcome back. Pause if you need more time with the title. Let's move on to learn about Harald Bluetooth. You may be thinking, Bluetooth, I've heard of that. You may have seen this symbol. You may use it all the time when you pair your phones to your headphones or your speakers or loads of other purposes that we use Bluetooth for. It's not a coincidence that Bluetooth is called Bluetooth because Bluetooth was invented by a Scandinavian electronics company called Ericsson. And when Ericsson were looking for a name to give to their wireless connectivity technology, they combined the runes, the Nordic letters for H for Harald and B for Bluetooth into this logo. So they actually named Bluetooth technology, it's actually named after the Viking king Harald Bluetooth. We're going to see later in this lesson why actually calling a wireless connectivity technology Bluetooth actually quite fitting, because one of the things that Harald Bluetooth did is connect places together. Misconception alert here. Harald Bluetooth, the Viking king who lived in the 10th century, did not invent Bluetooth technology. You may be laughing at that, but actually, a lot of people in the assessments, the actual GCSEs, when there was a question on Harald Bluetooth a couple of years ago, they wrote one of the impacts of Harald Bluetooth was that he invented Bluetooth technology. He did not invent Bluetooth technology. They named it after him. It would be 1,000 years after Harald Bluetooth's death that Bluetooth got invented. Anyway, enough of Bluetooth technology. What about Harald Bluetooth himself? Well, Harald Bluetooth, he was the king of Denmark, and most of our focus of kings is going to focus on Denmark because, as we saw right at the start, Denmark was the most fertile area of Scandinavia, and it was kind of the wealthiest area, and it was the first area to get proper kings. Further north in Norway, the blue area, and Sweden, the green area, the jarls and the warlords were still ruling. It was going to be a while before they had proper kings. Denmark is the area of Scandinavia, the area of the homelands that starts to get kings first. So we're going to look at the kings of Denmark. Before we look at the impact of Harald Bluetooth, though, if we're going to describe his impact and make a judgment about how great his impact was, we need to know a little bit about what Denmark was like before Harald Bluetooth became the king. And lots of this is just going to be a recap of what we already know about the Viking homelands. So firstly, Denmark before Harald Bluetooth was pagan. Remember what pagan means? It means not Christian. And we know a lot about Viking religion. We know, for example, that they worship the gods of Odin and Thor and Freya, and they do rituals and sacrifices to keep them happy. And they believe in the world tree, the Yggdrasil, and the different worlds of Asgard, where the gods live, and Midgard, and then Hell. And they believe that you have to die in battle if you want to go to Valhalla and live with the gods. So they weren't Christian, they were pagan. Denmark before Harald Bluetooth was also under attack, particularly from Germans, people in Germany who were attacking from the south up towards the Danish. And this was a problem because you couldn't have a proper wealthy society with lots of merchants coming to do business if there was constant threat of attack from Germans trying to take over your kingdom. Denmark was also very small. If you compare it to the other two homelands, Norway and Sweden, Denmark's tiny. And more than that, it's really disconnected. And if we zoom in at a map of Denmark, you can see what I mean. Here's a close-up of this map of Denmark. What you can see here is that Denmark is actually made up of a variety of islands. So all around here, you can see that, if I get my pointer, all the islands around here, they're all separated. All these islands are separated here. And the big part of Denmark is here, basically part of northern Germany. Here's Germany down here. And then another part of Denmark is over here, which is kind of part of the homeland's mainland, the Scandinavian mainland. So very separate. And if you're going to be the king of all of this, you're going to need to find some way to link it together. So that's Denmark before Harald Bluetooth comes along. In today's lesson, we're going to look at each of these features. So the fact that Denmark was small, it was under attack, it was disconnected, and it was pagan. And we're going to show how Harald changed this, and we're going to look at some evidence for this. I'm going to tell you about each of these in turn, and then you're going to do some practice once I finish talking. So let's start off with the fact that before Harald Bluetooth, Denmark was small. Denmark, when Harald Bluetooth became the king, was small. It was just this area, this purple area here. How did he change this? Well, he extended his kingdom into Norway. Not all of Norway, but just this other purple area here, which was called Vik. You can kind of see how, by taking control of Vik, Harald Bluetooth had almost doubled the size of the Danish kingdom. He'd started to make a proper, almost an empire from Denmark that was going to reach across the sea and increase the land available to the Danes. Now, you think there's lots of reasons why this might have been advantageous or might have been a good thing for the Danish. Firstly, they're getting even more fertile land where they can grow crops, or grazing land, for example, where they can put their cows and their sheep. There might be people who live in Vic, Jarls, for example, who might be able to fight for Harold if there's a war. So there's lots of reasons why expanding his kingdom into Norway was going to be very important for Harold. It also made him look much more powerful. He's the king of a place that's almost twice as big now. Right, let's do some practice. In your book, very familiar set of two tasks. First task, what's the question that's going to give you those answers? And then task two, I've written 3 sentence starters. You have to finish those sentence starters off using the knowledge that you've just gained about Denmark under Harald Bluetooth. So pause the video now, complete the tasks, come back when you're done. Okay, welcome back. Pause if you need more time for the tasks. I'm going to put up what I wrote now. So here's some suggested answers. You might obviously have slightly different ones. Pause the video now so that you can check my answers for these tasks against your answers. Okay, pause if you need more time. Let's move on to look at the next way in which Harald changed Denmark. We said that before Harald Bluetooth, Denmark was under attack. It was under attack from these guys, the Germans. Germany wasn't a united country in the 10th century, but there were lots of Germanic tribes led by King Otto who were intent on expanding their territory. And one of the ways they wanted to expand their territory was by invading Denmark. So you can see on this map down here, this green area here, this is kind of where the German tribes were. And Denmark was very vulnerable because there was this way that you could attack from the south up into Denmark. This is exactly what the Germans did. They kept attacking up into Denmark to try and invade and make Denmark part of their German territory. This was a real problem for Harold because not only did it mean that he was constantly having to go into battle and fight against the Germans, but also it damaged trade. Harold wanted to bring merchants from all over Europe and different Viking trading areas into Denmark so they could trade their goods. And if these merchants felt that they were constantly under a threat of getting brutally murdered by a savage German warrior, they weren't going to come. So if he wanted to encourage trade, he had to keep everybody safe. What is Harold going to do about this? Well, firstly, he built 4 huge circular wooden forts. This is an aerial photograph from today of one of these wooden forts. Now, obviously, the wood has rotted, but we can see from the air, from this helicopter shot, what the fort was supposed to look like. You can see that it's been built deliberately at the tributary of these 2 rivers, their confluence where they meet. So that means it's defended on 2 sides by a natural water barrier. They've also dug a moat around the outside here, and they've created earthworks in a perfectly circular shape. And there's 2 roads down the middle, perfect straight lines. This one points due south, due north, due west, and due east. One of the things we can learn from this is that Harold was a very neat person. He wanted everything to look absolutely right. And you can see here the outlines of some of the long houses that the Vikings lived in when they were in this fort. Here's an artist's reconstruction of what we think it might have looked like. So you've got your moats around the outside, then you've got this earthwork, and then you've got a wooden wall around it, and then these 2 very straight roads through the middle of these forts. And these forts were at different places around Denmark. So there was one up here in the north, another one there, and there was some down here in the south. These forts looked incredibly impressive, and they would have made Harold feel really good about himself. But they cost quite a lot of money. Harold had to raise taxes on his people to be able to pay for them, and it took an enormous amount of wood and labor to build. People had to work incredibly hard for lots of years to build these forts like this. And actually, if you look at the locations of some of the forts, like there's one here, this is a pretty pointless place to have a fort if you're trying to defend your kingdom. It's right in the middle. If the Germans have got all the way onto this island, then they probably already conquered most of Denmark. So lots of people looked at these forts and they thought, oh, they're really nice, Harold. They make you look very strong and very powerful, probably make you feel good about yourself, but they cost us loads of money. We had to work really hard to build them. And they're not very effective. They're not really in the best place. We're going to come back to these forts because they're going to cause problems for Harold later on. But before we do our practice, I just want to tell you about one other way that Harold defended his kingdom that was much more successful. And that is to do with this little green line down here. Harold built something called the Danevirk. Dane to do with Denmark. Virk, I think, means wall. And this is basically what he did. We know those Germans who were attacking from the south up this way. Harold built a wall. This is what remains of the wall, kind of earthworks, but there would have been wooden fence on top of it, across the bottom of Denmark. You can see it on this old-fashioned map here. It linked up to rivers, so there was the river defending, and then the wall in between them. And this meant that if the Germans were going to attack, if the German tribes wanted to march up from the south and attack Denmark, it was going to be easy to stop them because they had the Danevirk. And that meant that behind this wall, all the trading that Harold wanted could go on. So the Danevirk was very successful because it was actually in the right place to stop the Germans. The wooden forts, not so much. Okay, practice time. Same as before. 4 answers, you write me the question, and then sentences just like before. Pause the video now and come back when you're done. Okay, welcome back. Pause if you need more time. I'm going to put up my answers now. Pause the video now and check your answers against my answers. Okay, pause if you need more time to do your checking. Let's move on to look at the next way that Harold changed Denmark. Disconnected. We saw before that before Harald Bluetooth's reign, Denmark was disconnected. Right? It was a series of lots of different small islands. It was on 2 different mainlands. And it was going to be very difficult to keep everyone feeling like they were part of one country. This would be made even worse by the fact that Harold had added this place called Vik in Norway to his empire. And that meant that he had this other part of his kingdom that was even further away. The first thing that Harold did to connect his country together was to move the capital of his kingdom. Gorm the Old, Harold's father, had had his capital at this town here called Jelling. This had been the traditional capital of Denmark. It's where Gorm the Old was buried, and we're going to see a little bit of Jelling in a little bit. But it was quite a long way from, say, Vik up here in the north, or over here on these islands, quite a long way away from Jelling. So what Harold did is that he moved his capital city from Jelling to this place here called Roskilde. Roskilde was a much better place to have the capital because it was kind of in the center of all the different Danish islands. It was also much closer to Norway and to the new territory of Vik that Harold had added to his kingdom. So by being in Roskilde and having his capital there, Harold was connecting his kingdom up. The other thing that Harold did to connect up his kingdom in a very literal way was that he spent lots of his taxes, and again, he's getting people to do a lot of work for him by investing, spending money on these great projects, bridges and roads to connect his kingdom together. As we see here, one of the problems with Denmark is that it's got lots of islands, but it's also quite marshy and boggy. And so even where it looks like it's land, you can't drive a cart over it, for example. So Harald Bluetooth built a lot of bridges and roads to connect his kingdom together. The very famous one is this bridge called the Ravening Enger Bridge. You don't need to know particularly what it's called, but that is what it's called. That was wide enough for two carts to go in two directions at once. It was like a proper modern road and bridge. And as you can see here, it's built up on stilts above the marsh, which allowed people to travel down it nice and easily. It was several kilometers long. And it really helped trade as people could move around the kingdom much more easily. Again, though, a bit like the forts, it cost a lot of taxes to build this bridge and the other roads and bridges. And some people said that this bridge in particular, it didn't really just go in a straight line from one side of the marsh to the other side of the marsh. It kind of took a higgledy-piggledy route, and actually ended up being twice as long as it needed to be. Some of Harold's critics would say Harold just wanted to build the longest bridge, and he wasn't that interested in how effective it was. He just wanted to look great with his amazing bridge. These kind of ideas are going to come back to bite Harold. But for the moment, everyone loves him because he's built bridges to connect his kingdom together. Going back to Bluetooth, which Harold didn't invent, but he was named after him. Here's why it's so fitting that Ericsson, the electronics company, named their new invention, Bluetooth, after Harold Bluetooth. Because what does Bluetooth do? It connects different devices together. What did Harold do? He connected different parts of Denmark together. Let's do some practice. Same as before, 4 answers, write me 4 questions, and then complete the sentences at the bottom, please. Pause the video now. I'll see you when you're done. Okay, welcome back. I'm going to show you the answers now, so pause if you need a bit more time. Here are the answers that I wrote, or the questions that I wrote. Pause the video, use your purple pens to check. You might have written slightly different questions, that's fine. Okay, let's go on then and look at the final way in which Harold changed Denmark. And this, I would say, I've left it to last because it's the most important way that Harold changed Denmark. It's what he's most known for, apart from having a technology named after him. Before Harold Bluetooth, Denmark was pagan. We saw how Gorm the Old, Harold's dad, he was a very committed and faithful pagan. He worshipped the pagan gods. He believed in the different worlds of Yggdrasil, the world tree, the Asgard, Midgard, and Hel. He took part in the rituals and sacrifices to these gods, and he definitely believed that the way to get to heaven was dying in battle. He didn't do a good job of it because he got to be so old. And Harold was brought up as a committed and faithful pagan too. However, before we talk about Harold was brought up as a committed and faithful pagan too. How do we know this? Well, here is an aerial photograph, a modern aerial photograph of the town of Jelling. Now, if you remember, Jelling was the old capital of Denmark before Harold moved it to Roskilde to be nearer the rest of his empire. This is quite an interesting site. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is these 2 big mounds. These are not natural hills, but they're man-made. These are graves. In this north mound, Gorm the Old was buried by his son when he died. This is where Gorm was buried. He was buried in this big mound because this is what pagan burial looked like. Under the ground here, there is a huge Viking longship that actually stretches all the way from one mound to the other and then the same distance again. So this mound, the north mound, this is at one end of the ship. The south mound is in the middle of the ship and it goes on a bit more. And burying people in longships was a traditional pagan burial service. In Christianity, obviously, you bury people in a churchyard next to a church. The pagans didn't do that. They buried them in mounds or in ships. And Gorm the Old was buried in this mound here. However, although Harold had buried his father in the pagan way, and he'd been brought up a committed Christian, in 965, just 5 years after he became king, Harold converted to Christianity. He was baptized. If you're baptized, it means you go through the ceremony of becoming a Christian. You have so like, if this happens when you're a child, it's like going to a christening. We have some water sprinkled on your head. Um, but if you're an adult, you kind of get dunked into some water because this is how John the Baptist, for example, baptized Christians in the early days of Christianity. You can see here, here's a priest on the left-hand side. He is baptizing Harold, who's kind of in this barrel of water, getting baptized. So Harold is becoming a Christian. We don't need to spend too much time on this, but it's interesting to think about why he might have decided to become a Christian because he was brought up a pagan. It may be that he had some kind of vision, or he met a priest who persuaded him that Christianity was the way forward, or somebody performed a miracle in front of him and he started to believe in the Christian God. However, it may be that he had more practical and cynical reasons for becoming a Christian. One of the reasons that the Germans kept attacking him is that he was a pagan and they were Christians, and they felt it was their duty to try and take hold of Denmark and force it to convert to Christianity. Harold might have thought, if I convert to Christianity and I get Denmark to convert to Christianity, then the Germans will stop attacking me. There were also some merchants who were Christians and who refused to trade with Denmark because it was a pagan place. So Harold may have thought, I can get a bit richer if there's more trade happening and Christian traders come over and do business with me. So he may well have decided to become a Christian for those reasons, or it may be a combination of all of them. Either way, we know that Harold became a Christian because he changed the gravesite at Jelling, where his father was buried, in quite important ways. Let's go back to Jelling. When Harold gets baptized as a Christian, his father is buried in this big pagan mound. Harold does three things to change Jelling. Firstly, he builds this church. He builds a wooden church, it's now a stone church, in the center between these two mounds, basically saying, all this pagan stuff, I'm rejecting that. I'm now building a church right in the middle of where we used to bury our dead in the pagan way. And he goes even further than that. He goes to the North Mound, he digs up his dad from his old pagan grave, and he buries him in the churchyard of the new church in a proper Christian way. So he feels so strongly about his change of religion that he thinks, no, that even though my father would have wanted to be buried as a pagan because he was a pagan, I'm going to bury him in this new Christian way because I'm now such a strong and committed Christian. The other thing he did is that he commissioned, that means he ordered someone to make it for him, he commissioned a rune stone. And the rune stone looks like this, or it looked like this. We've got the outline of it still, but this is like a modern painted reconstruction. A rune stone was kind of like a memorial. And you can see here that one of the things on this Viking runestone that is at Jelling is that it's got all these Nordic kind of twists around the outside, but in the middle here, quite unmistakably, this is Jesus on the cross, a Christian symbol on a runestone. And then on the back of the runestone, it's got some writing in the Norse language, in these runes, and it says this: King Harold ordered this monument to be made in memory of Gorm, his father, and in memory of Thyra, his mother. That's very nice. That same Harold, who himself ruled all of Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christian. So here's Harold basically boasting that he ruled all of Denmark, but also one of his great achievements, he thinks, because he got to write this, is that he made the Danes Christian. It wasn't just him who was converting, all of Denmark had to follow and become Christian. We don't know, but it seems likely that there were some Christians already in Denmark and they would have really liked this. But there would have been other Danes who quite liked their old pagan religion. They liked believing in Valhalla and Odin and Thor, and they didn't want to change. Harold changed Denmark in lots of different ways by making it Christian. We've got some evidence for this. One of the evidence is that he minted coins to help with trade, and they had crosses on them. They're actually called Harold Bluetooth cross coins, and the crosses obviously represent Christianity. So we know from his coins that he was trying to spread the idea of Christianity across his kingdom. But he also spent lots of money again and lots of labour was put into building churches across Denmark, including cathedrals. A cathedral is a really big church in the capital of Roskilde. This is a modern picture of Roskilde Cathedral. And Harald said that when he died, he didn't want to be buried in the old kind of pagan Jelling. He wanted to be buried in Roskilde Cathedral, a Christian building with no trace of paganism about it at all. In fact, when he died, Harald was buried in Roskilde Cathedral, and all of the Danish royals, even up to today, they are also buried in Roskilde Cathedral. So Harald made this great change of changing Denmark from a pagan country, a pagan kingdom, into a Christian kingdom. Okay, that's quite a lot of information. Let's do some practice on that. So pause the video now. You've got your 5 answers, give me 5 questions, and then some sentences to complete. Off you go. Okay, welcome back. I'm going to put up the answers now, so pause if you need more time. Here's some options that things you could have written. Use your purple pens to correct. Pause the video if you need time. Okay, I'm going to move on from this slide, so pause if you still need it. Let's just do a quick summary of everything that we have learned today about how Harald changed Denmark. On the left-hand side, I'm going to put a statement about Denmark before Harald Bluetooth. And I just want you to write down in your books a way that Harald changed Denmark. So, for example, let's start this first one. I'll just do this as an example, so don't write anything. So I might say Denmark was pagan, and then I just want you to write down some ways in which Harald changed that. So you might write these things. Harald converted Denmark to Christianity. You might have said Harald built a cathedral, or he built a church in Jelling, for example. Nice and straightforward. So here's 3 statements. So you need to give me 3 pieces of evidence that show that Harald changed this. So the first one is this: Denmark was small, Denmark was disconnected, Denmark was under attack. Can you give me some specific evidence that shows how Harald changed these things? Pause the video now, come back when you're done. Okay, welcome back. Here are your answers. Denmark was small. Harald changed this by taking control of Vik in Norway. Denmark was disconnected. You could have written that Harald moved the capital to Roskilde to be nearer Vik, or Harald built long wooden bridges, for example. Denmark was under attack. You could talk about the circular wooden forts that weren't very effective, or the Danevirke that stopped attacks from the Germans. Use your purple pen to make corrections if you need to. We're going to do some more work on Harald next time. But for now, well done on your work today, and we'll carry on with the kings in our next history lesson.